Dr. Riley Martinez stared at her coffee cup, watching the steam rise in the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital break room. It was barely 6 in the morning, and she was already on her second cup. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford during her residency at Metro General Hospital. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of countless nights spent saving lives and learning her craft. Her phone buzzed with a text from the chief of surgery. "New patient incoming, VIP case. See me immediately." Riley's stomach dropped. VIP cases usually meant trouble. Either celebrities who demanded special treatment or wealthy patients whose families expected miracles. Both came with pressure she didn't need. She made her way through the familiar hallways past the usual chaos of morning rounds. Nurses rushed between rooms, monitors beeped their electronic songs, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint aroma of breakfast from the cafeteria. This place had become more home to her than her tiny apartment across town. Dr. Williams, the chief of surgery, was waiting in his office with a thick file in his hands. He was a man in his 60s who had seen everything the medical world could throw at him. His gray hair was perfectly combed and his white coat was spotless, a stark contrast to Riley's wrinkled scrubs. "Dr. Martinez, we have a situation," he began, sliding the file across his desk. "Vivian Blackwood, age 43. She's been in a coma for 3 months following a car accident. The family has money, serious money. We're talking about one of the wealthiest women in the state." Riley opened the file and began reading. The photos showed a woman who, even unconscious, carried an air of elegance. Her dark hair was perfectly maintained and someone had clearly been taking excellent care of her appearance. But it was the medical details that caught Riley's attention. "She's been at Riverside Private Medical Center since the accident," Dr. Williams continued. "Top neurologists, best equipment money can buy. But now she's developed a complication they can't handle there. Severe hemorrhoids that have become infected. It sounds simple, but in her condition it's become dangerous." Riley looked up from the file. "Why are they transferring her here? Surely they have surgeons who can handle this." Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair. "Their surgeon is on vacation, and their backup had a family emergency. We're the closest hospital with availability. The family wasn't happy about it, but medical emergencies don't wait for convenience." The file contained months of medical records. Vivian had been driving home from a business meeting when her car went off the road and hit a tree. The impact had caused severe brain trauma, and despite the best medical care money could provide, she remained unresponsive. Her vital signs were stable, but there was no sign of consciousness. "The family will be here," Dr. Williams added, her sister Amanda and the family lawyer. "They're particular about how their loved one is treated. I'm assigning this case to you because you're thorough and you don't get rattled by pressure." Riley felt a mix of pride and anxiety. This was exactly the kind of case that could make or break a young doctor's career. One mistake with someone this wealthy and connected could end everything she'd worked for. 2 hours later, the ambulance arrived. Riley watched from the emergency bay as the paramedics carefully transferred Vivian from the private medical transport. Even after months of being bedridden, she looked nothing like the typical long-term coma patients Riley had seen. Her skin was healthy, her hair was styled, and her nails were perfectly manicured. Money, it seemed, could buy dignity even in unconsciousness. The entourage that followed was equally impressive. Amanda Blackwood looked like a carbon copy of her sister, just awake and angry. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Riley made in a month, and her sharp eyes took in every detail of the public hospital with obvious displeasure. "This is completely unacceptable," Amanda was saying to a man in an expensive suit who could only be the family lawyer. "Vivian belongs in a proper medical facility, not this public institution." Riley introduced herself, keeping her voice professional and calm. "Ms. Blackwood, I'm Dr. Martinez. I'll be performing your sister's surgery. I want you to know that we'll take excellent care of her." Amanda's eyes swept over Riley, taking in her youth and the fact that she was clearly a resident, not a senior physician. "How old are you, doctor? And how many surgeries like this have you performed?" The question stung, but Riley had expected it. "I've performed this procedure many times, ma'am." "Your sister is in good hands." The lawyer stepped forward. "Dr. Martinez, I hope you understand the delicate nature of the situation. Ms. Blackwood is a very prominent figure in our community. Any complications could have serious consequences." Riley felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to remain professional. "I understand your concerns. My only focus is providing the best possible medical care for your sister." As they moved Vivian to her room, Riley couldn't help but notice how peaceful she looked. Unlike many coma patients who appeared troubled or distant, Vivian's face held an almost serene expression. Her breathing was steady and strong, and her color was good. If not for the closed eyes and the various monitoring equipment, she could have been sleeping. The room they assigned her was one of the better ones at Metro General, but it paled in comparison to what she'd left behind at the private hospital. Amanda immediately began complaining about everything from the quality of the bedding to the view from the window. Riley spent the afternoon reviewing Vivian's case in detail. The hemorrhoid condition had developed over the past month, likely due to the prolonged bed rest and changes in her digestive system. What started as a minor issue had become infected and dangerous. If left untreated, it could lead to sepsis, which could be fatal in her weakened state. The surgery itself was routine, something Riley had done dozens of times. But performing it on a coma patient presented unique challenges. The positioning would be crucial, and monitoring her vital signs throughout the procedure would require extra attention. Any unexpected changes could indicate serious problems. As evening approached, Riley made her final preparations. She reviewed the surgical plan once more, checked and double-checked the equipment, and spoke with the anesthesiology team. Everything had to be perfect. Standing beside Vivian's bed, Riley found herself wondering about the woman's life. What had she been like before the accident? What dreams and plans had been cut short by that moment on the road? The wealthy lifestyle was obvious, but what kind of person was she really? "Tomorrow morning," she whispered to the unconscious woman. "We're going to take good care of you, I promise." The night shift nurse, Janet, joined her at the bedside. "She's beautiful, isn't she? Hard to believe she's been like this for 3 months." Riley nodded. "Any changes in her condition?" "Nothing significant. Vitals are stable. It's like she's just sleeping." As Riley finally headed home for a few hours of rest, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to change everything. She just didn't know how yet. Riley arrived at the hospital before dawn, her hands steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She'd barely slept, running through every possible scenario in her mind. The surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m., and she wanted extra time to prepare. The operating room was already being set up when she arrived. The surgical team knew this was a special case. Word traveled fast in a hospital, especially when it involved someone with Vivian Blackwood's reputation. Everyone wanted to make sure everything went perfectly. "Morning, Dr. Martinez," called out Tony, the head surgical nurse. He'd been at Metro General for over 20 years, and had seen every kind of case imaginable. "Room's almost ready. Patient's vitals looked good on the night report." Riley nodded, pulling on her scrubs. "Any word from the family?" "They're in the waiting room. Sister's been here since 5 a.m., pacing like a caged tiger. The lawyer's with her, making phone calls." In the prep room, Riley went through her ritual, the same routine she followed before every surgery. She washed her hands methodically, taking extra time with each finger, each nail. It was meditative, helping to calm her nerves and focus her mind. Today, she added an extra prayer for steady hands and clear thinking. Dr. Peterson, the anesthesiologist, joined her at the sink. He was a calm man in his 50s who had put thousands of patients under anesthesia safely. "Interesting case today," he said, scrubbing his own hands. 3 months in a coma, but her numbers have been surprisingly stable. "What do you think her chances are?" Riley asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "For surviving the surgery? Excellent. For waking up from the coma?" He shrugged. "That's not our department today. We just fix what we can fix and hope for the best." At exactly 7 a.m., they wheeled Vivian into the operating room. Even under the harsh surgical lights, she looked peaceful. Her breathing was steady and strong, and her skin had a healthy color that surprised everyone who expected a typical long-term coma patient. "All right, everyone," Riley announced as the team took their positions. "This is a standard procedure, but our patient's condition makes everything more delicate. I want constant monitoring of all vitals. Any changes, no matter how small, I want to know immediately." The team nodded in understanding. There was Janet from the night shift who had volunteered to stay for the surgery. Tony was managing the instruments, his experienced hands already anticipating Riley's needs. Dr. Peterson was monitoring the anesthesia and vital signs, his eyes never leaving the displays. "Beginning anesthesia now." Dr. Peterson announced, though in Vivian's case it was more about maintaining her unconscious state than putting her under. Heart rate steady at 72. Blood pressure normal. Oxygen saturation excellent. Riley began the careful process of positioning Vivian for the surgery. This was always the most awkward part of the procedure, but it was crucial for proper access and patient safety. She took extra care knowing that Vivian's body had been weakened by months of immobility. Positioning complete, she announced, beginning the procedure now. The first incision was clean and precise. Riley had done this surgery so many times she could practically perform it with her eyes closed, but today every movement was deliberate and careful. The infection was worse than she'd expected from the charts, another reminder that even routine procedures could hold surprises. Suction, she requested, and Tony immediately provided it. The surgical field cleared, giving her a better view of what she was working with. The infection has spread more than anticipated, but it's still manageable. This is going to take a little longer than planned. 20 minutes into the surgery, everything was going smoothly. Riley worked with quiet concentration, removing the infected tissue and cleaning the area thoroughly. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a reassuring rhythm to work by. "Looking good, Doc," Tony commented, anticipating her need for a different instrument. "Clean work as always." Riley smiled behind her mask. Compliments from experienced surgical nurses meant more than praise from attending physicians. These were the people who saw every surgeon's work up close and personal. It was during the most delicate part of the procedure that everything changed. "Heart rates climbing," Dr. Peterson announced, his voice carrying a note of concern. 75, 80, 85. Riley paused, her hands steady but alert. Blood pressure? Rising too, 140/90 and climbing. This wasn't necessarily unusual during surgery, but with a coma patient, any change in vital signs could indicate serious problems. Riley continued her work, but everyone in the room was now on high alert. "Could be a response to the procedure," she said, more to herself than to the team. Her body's been through a lot of trauma. Sometimes the nervous system reacts unexpectedly, but the numbers kept climbing. Heart rate hit 90, then 95. Blood pressure continued to rise. Dr. Peterson adjusted the anesthesia, but the changes continued. "Dr. Martinez," Janet said softly. "Look at her face." Riley glanced up from her work and felt her heart skip a beat. Vivian's facial muscles were twitching slightly. Small movements, but definitely there. In a coma patient, this could mean many things, most of them not good. "Brain activity?" Riley asked quickly. "I don't have an EEG running, but..." Dr. Peterson leaned closer to his monitors. "Something's definitely changing." Riley made a decision. "I need to finish this as quickly as possible. Everyone stay alert. If her condition changes dramatically, we may need to stop." She worked faster now, but still with precision. The infected area was almost completely cleaned, and she was beginning the process of closing when the impossible happened. Vivian's eyes fluttered. "Did you see that?" Janet whispered. Everyone in the room froze for a moment, staring at their patient. Then it happened again, a definite flutter of the eyelids followed by a slight movement of her head. "That's not possible," Dr. Peterson muttered, but his instruments were telling him otherwise. "Brain activity is spiking. Heart rates at 100 and climbing." Riley's hands never stopped moving. She was so close to finishing that stopping now could cause more problems than continuing. But her mind was racing. Coma patients didn't just wake up during surgery. It wasn't how these things worked. Then Vivian's eyes opened. Not the confused, unfocused gaze of someone coming out of anesthesia, but clear, aware eyes that looked directly at Riley. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the two women stared at each other across the surgical table. "Doctor..." Tony's voice was barely above a whisper. Vivian tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented it. Her eyes were wide now, clearly conscious and aware of her surroundings. She tried to move, but the surgical positioning and restraints kept her in place. "Increase the anesthesia," Riley ordered, her voice surprisingly calm despite the chaos in her mind. "Now!" Dr. Peterson was already moving, adjusting his equipment, pushing more sedation. I've never seen anything like this." Within seconds, Vivian's eyes began to close again. But not before Riley saw something in them that would haunt her for days to come. Not confusion or fear, but a look of profound gratitude, as if she was thanking Riley for bringing her back. Vitals stabilizing, Dr. Peterson reported as Vivian slipped back into unconsciousness. Heart rate dropping back to normal ranges. Riley completed the final sutures with hands that somehow remained steady, though her mind was reeling. 3 months of the best medical care money could buy, and Vivian Blackwood had awakened during a routine hemorrhoid surgery performed by a resident at a public hospital. "Surgery complete," she announced, stepping back from the table. "Patient is stable." But as they prepared to move Vivian to recovery, everyone in that room knew that nothing about this case was going to be routine anymore. The woman who had been unconscious for 3 months had just looked directly into Riley's eyes and tried to speak. The miracle they'd all hoped for had happened, but it had happened in the most unexpected way possible. As they wheeled Vivian toward recovery, Riley caught Janet's eye. "Not a word of this leaves this room until we understand what just happened," she said quietly. But secrets in hospitals were like water in a broken dam. They never stayed contained for long. Word spread through Metro General Hospital like wildfire. Despite Riley's request for discretion, secrets in hospitals never lasted long. By lunchtime, everyone from the janitors to the chief of staff had heard some version of the story. The woman in room 312 had woken up during surgery. The coma patient who hadn't moved in 3 months had opened her eyes and tried to speak. Riley sat in the recovery room, watching Vivian's monitors. The surgery had been successful. The infection was gone and all signs pointed to a smooth healing process. But the patient herself remained unconscious again, just as she had been for the past 3 months. If it wasn't for the 5 other people in that operating room, Riley might have convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. "Dr. Martinez." A voice behind her made her turn. Dr. Williams stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "My office now." The walk down the hallway felt like the longest of Riley's life. Nurses and other doctors stopped their conversations as she passed, their curious eyes following her every step. She could practically hear the whisper starting up again as soon as she was out of earshot. Dr. Williams closed his office door behind them and gestured for her to sit. His desk was covered with papers and his phone had been ringing constantly since the news broke. "Tell me exactly what happened in that operating room," he said, settling into his chair. "And I mean everything. Don't leave out any detail, no matter how small." Riley took a deep breath and recounted the entire surgery, from the routine beginning to the shocking moment when Vivian's eyes opened. Dr. Williams listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "And you're certain she was conscious? Not just reflexive movement or some kind of seizure activity?" "She looked directly at me," Riley said firmly. Her eyes tracked my movement. She tried to speak. This wasn't random muscle movement. She was aware and trying to communicate. Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Do you have any idea what this means? The implications of what you're telling me?" Riley shook her head, though she was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. "The Blackwood family has already been on the phone with me 6 times this morning," he continued. "They want answers. The media has somehow gotten wind of this. My secretary has fielded calls from 3 news stations already, and the hospital board is asking questions I don't have answers to." Before Riley could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Dr. Williams called for them to enter, and Amanda Blackwood strode in, her face a mask of controlled fury. The family lawyer was right behind her, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive enough to pay Riley's student loans. "Dr. Williams, I demand to know what happened to my sister," Amanda said without preamble. "Your resident claims Vivian woke up during surgery, but now she's unconscious again. What kind of medical facility are you running here?" The lawyer stepped forward. "My client has serious concerns about the care her sister is receiving. If there was some kind of medical error or negligence—" "There was no negligence," Riley interrupted, standing up. "The surgery was performed correctly. What happened was the unexpected." Amanda's sharp eyes fixed on Riley. "Unexpected? My sister has been in a coma for 3 months. The best neurologists in the country have examined her. And you're telling me she just happened to wake up while you were operating on her hemorrhoids?" "I know how it sounds," Riley began, but Amanda cut her off. "It sounds impossible. It sounds like someone is either lying or incompetent." Dr. Williams stood up, his voice carrying the authority of decades in medicine. "Ms. Blackwood, I understand your frustration, but Dr. Martinez is one of our most capable residents. If she says your sister regained consciousness during surgery, then that's what happened. Then where is she now? Amanda demanded. Why isn't she awake? The question hung in the air like a challenge. It was the same question Riley had been asking herself since the moment they'd wheeled Vivian out of the operating room. That's what we're going to find out, Dr. Williams said. I'm bringing in Dr. Rebecca Chen, our chief of neurology. She'll conduct a full evaluation and try to determine what might have triggered this response. The lawyer made some notes on his tablet. We'll need copies of all medical records, surgical notes, and video footage from the operating room. Video footage? Riley's heart sank. She'd forgotten that all surgeries at Metro General were recorded for training purposes. Everything will be made available, Dr. Williams assured them. We want to understand this as much as you do. After the Blackwood family left, Riley found herself alone with Dr. Williams again. The silence stretched between them until he finally spoke. This could be the best thing that ever happened to your career, he said quietly. Or it could be the end of it. Medical miracles make headlines, but they also invite scrutiny. Every decision you made in that operating room will be examined by experts. Every second of that surgery will be analyzed. Riley felt the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. I did everything right. I followed every protocol. I believe you, but belief doesn't matter when lawyers and insurance companies get involved, and they will get involved. An hour later, Riley met Dr. Chen in Vivian's room. The neurologist was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair. She'd built her reputation on solving medical mysteries that other doctors couldn't crack. Fascinating case, Dr. Chen said, reviewing Vivian's chart while examining the patient. 3 months of complete unconsciousness, then sudden awareness during a surgical procedure. The brain is remarkably complex, but this is unusual even by neurological standards. She performed a series of tests, checking reflexes, shining lights in Vivian's eyes, testing responses to various stimuli. Throughout it all, Vivian remained completely unresponsive. Any theories? Riley asked. Dr. Chen pulled up Vivian's brain scans on the room's computer. The original injury was severe, significant trauma to the frontal and parietal lobes. But look at these areas here, she pointed to specific regions on the scan. There's been some healing over the past 3 months. The brain has a remarkable ability to rewire itself, create new pathways around damaged areas. So it's possible she could have been regaining consciousness gradually? Possible, yes. But that doesn't explain why it happened during your surgery. The timing suggests something specific triggered the awakening. Dr. Chen turned from the screen to look at Riley. Tell me about the positioning during the procedure. Riley walked through the entire surgical setup, describing how they'd positioned Vivian for optimal access to the surgical site. Dr. Chen listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification. You placed her in a modified lateral position, correct? Head slightly elevated, body turned to the right, standard positioning for that type of procedure. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. It's possible that the change in position improved blood flow to previously compromised areas of the brain. Combined with the body's stress response to surgery, it might have been enough to trigger consciousness. But why did she go unconscious again? The anesthesia you administered would have suppressed brain activity. But more importantly, maintaining consciousness requires energy. Her brain may not have been ready to sustain that level of activity. By evening, the story had reached the local news. Riley watched in horror as a reporter stood outside Metro General, describing the miracle awakening of a local heiress during surgery. They got most of the facts wrong, but the basic story was out there for the world to see. Her phone had been buzzing all day with calls from friends, family, and reporters. She'd stopped answering after the 5th journalist asked her how it felt to perform a miracle surgery. Dr. Chen found her in the cafeteria, staring at an untouched sandwich. Long day? The neurologist asked, sitting down across from her. That's one way to put it. 3 months ago, nobody knew my name. Now I'm apparently either a miracle worker or a fraud, depending on who you ask. Medicine is full of phenomena we don't completely understand, Dr. Chen said gently. The human brain is incredibly complex. Sometimes remarkable things happen that challenge everything we think we know. Riley looked up at her. Do you think she'll wake up again? Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Based on what I observed today, I believe your patient experienced genuine consciousness during that surgery. Whether it happens again depends on factors we may not fully understand yet. And if it doesn't, Then you provided excellent medical care to a patient who needed it. That's what doctors do. The rest, the miracles, the mysteries, the media attention, that's not why we went into medicine. As Riley finally headed home that night, she passed by Vivian's room one more time. The patient lay peaceful and still, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment. But Riley couldn't shake the memory of those clear, aware eyes looking directly at her. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more scrutiny, and more pressure. But tonight she allowed herself to hope that somewhere behind those closed eyelids, Vivian Blackwood was fighting her way back to the world of the living. 3 days after the surgery, Riley was reviewing patient charts when her pager buzzed urgently. The message was simple but sent her heart racing. Room 3 on 12. Patient awake. Come immediately. She ran through the hospital corridors, her mind spinning with possibilities. When she burst through Vivian's door, she found Dr. Chen standing beside the bed, holding a pen light. But this time, Vivian's eyes were open and tracking the light's movement. She's been conscious for about 10 minutes, Dr. Chen said quietly. Fully aware, responding to commands. It's remarkable. Riley approached the bed slowly, still hardly believing what she was seeing. Vivian turned her head toward the sound of footsteps and their eyes met for the second time. But now there was no surgical table between them, no breathing tube preventing speech. Doctor. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from months of disuse, but unmistakably conscious and aware. You're the one who was operating on me? Riley nodded, finding her own voice. I'm Dr. Martinez, how are you feeling? Vivian tried to sit up but was still too weak. Like I've been asleep for a very long time. How long exactly? 3 months, Dr. Chen answered. You were in a car accident in March. Do you remember anything about that? A shadow crossed Vivian's face and she was quiet for a long moment. I remember driving home from the office. It was raining, then she closed her eyes, concentrating. The brakes didn't work. I pressed and pressed, but nothing happened. Riley and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. Car accidents were traumatic and memory issues were common with head injuries. But something in Vivian's tone suggested this was more than just a recovered memory. The brakes failed? Dr. Chen asked gently. They didn't fail, Vivian said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Someone tampered with them. I'm certain of it. Before anyone could respond, Amanda burst through the door, tears streaming down her face. Vivian, oh my God, you're awake! She rushed to the bedside, grasping her sister's hand. Amanda, Vivian smiled weakly. You look terrible. Have you been sleeping? Despite everything, Amanda laughed through her tears. 3 months of worry will do that to a person. We thought... The doctor said you might never wake up. I could hear you sometimes, Vivian said softly. When you visited and talked to me, I wanted to respond, but I couldn't make my body work. Riley felt a chill run down her spine. You were aware during the coma? Not always. It came and went like waves. Sometimes I felt like I was floating somewhere far away. Other times I could hear voices, feel people touching my hands. Vivian's eyes found Riley's again. But during the surgery, the pain brought me back completely. It was like someone had turned on a light switch in my brain. Dr. Chen was furiously taking notes. This is consistent with some theories about consciousness during comatose states. The surgical stress response, combined with the change in positioning, likely improved blood flow to the recovering areas of your brain. I need to tell you something important, Vivian said, struggling to sit up higher. Amanda helped adjust her pillows. The accident wasn't random. Someone tried to kill me. The room fell silent. Amanda's face went pale and she sank into the chair beside the bed. Vivian, you've been through tremendous trauma, Dr. Chen said carefully. Sometimes brain injuries can affect memory and perception. My memory is fine, Vivian interrupted with more strength than anyone expected. For the past month, I've been receiving threatening phone calls and emails. Someone didn't want me to testify in the Meridian Pharmaceuticals case. Riley had never heard of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, but Amanda's expression suggested she knew exactly what Vivian was talking about. You said you weren't going to get involved in that, Amanda said quietly. I changed my mind. 3 weeks before the accident, I decided to. We'll come forward with what I knew about Dad's old company, the safety data they buried, the people who got sick from their drugs. Vivian's voice was getting stronger, but her hands were shaking. Someone knew I was going to testify, and they tried to stop me. Riley looked between the sisters, trying to piece together what she was hearing. Your father owned a pharmaceutical company? He founded Meridian Pharmaceuticals 40 years ago, Amanda explained. Sold it 15 years before he died, but there have been ongoing lawsuits about drugs that were approved back then. Drugs that might have caused serious health problems. Vivian closed her eyes as if the effort of talking was exhausting her, but she continued. I found documents in Dad's personal papers after he died. Internal memos, test results, safety reports that were never submitted to the FDA. People died because of drugs that should never have been approved. And you were going to give this information to the lawyers suing the company? Dr. Chen asked. I was supposed to testify next month. The lead attorney said my father's documents could be the key to proving their case. Vivian opened her eyes and looked directly at Riley. 3 days after I agreed to testify, someone broke into my house. Nothing was stolen, but my computer was accessed. A week later, the threatening calls started. Riley felt like she was in the middle of a movie plot, not a medical case. Did you go to the police? I tried, but threatening phone calls are hard to prove, especially when the caller uses voice distortion technology. The detective said there wasn't enough evidence to investigate. Amanda was crying again, but this time from anger rather than relief. Why didn't you tell me? We could have hired security or you could have stayed with me. Because I thought I was being paranoid. Brain tumors, heart problems, liver damage, all linked to a drug called Nexatrol that Dad's company pushed through approval 25 years ago. Thousands of people took it before it was pulled from the market. The families of people who died have been fighting for justice ever since. Riley was beginning to understand the implications. And your testimony could prove the company knew the drug was dangerous? More than that. The documents show they falsified safety data and bribed FDA officials to get approval. It wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate fraud that killed people. Dr. Chen had stopped taking notes and was staring at Vivian in amazement. You've been unconscious for 3 months, but you're recalling extremely detailed information about complex legal and business matters. This level of cognitive function after such a severe brain injury is remarkable. The accident didn't damage my memory, Vivian said grimly. Someone just tried to make sure I'd never be able to use it. Over the next few hours, as word spread that Vivian was awake and talking, her room became a hub of activity. Police detectives arrived to take her statement about the brake tampering. The family lawyer came with documents for her to review. Hospital security increased patrols after Amanda expressed concerns about her sister's safety. Through it all, Riley found herself drawn back to Vivian's room repeatedly. There was something about the woman's story that resonated with her. Here was someone who had chosen to do the right thing, even knowing it might put her in danger. During a quiet moment in the evening, when the visitors had gone and the hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Riley sat beside Vivian's bed. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, Riley said, about hearing voices during the coma. Do you remember hearing me during the surgery? Vivian smiled, the first genuine smile Riley had seen from her. You told me you were going to take good care of me, that you promised to help me. I remember thinking that your voice sounded kind. I did promise that, didn't I? You kept that promise. More than you know. Vivian reached out and touched Riley's hand. The pain from the surgery, it was like a rope pulling me back from a very dark place. I don't think I would have found my way back without that. Riley felt tears prick her eyes. I was terrified I'd done something wrong when you woke up in the operating room. You did something right. You saved my life in more ways than one. Vivian's expression grew serious again. But I'm going to need help finishing what I started. Those people who tried to kill me, they're still out there. And the families who lost loved ones to Nexatrol deserve justice. Riley squeezed Vivian's hand gently. What do you need me to do? Help me get strong enough to testify. The trial starts in 6 weeks. If I can't appear in court, the case could fall apart. And all those deaths will have been for nothing. Looking at this brave woman who had fought her way back from unconsciousness to seek justice for strangers, Riley knew she was about to become involved in something much bigger than a medical case. Then we better get to work, she said. 6 weeks later, Riley stood outside the federal courthouse, watching as news vans lined the street. The Meridian Pharmaceuticals trial had become one of the biggest corporate fraud cases in years, and everyone wanted to see the woman who had literally awakened from a coma to seek justice. Inside the courthouse, Vivian sat in a wheelchair, still recovering her strength but determined to tell her story. Her physical therapy had been intense, and Riley had been there for every session, helping her regain the stamina she'd need for what could be hours of testimony. "Are you ready for this?" Riley asked, adjusting the pillow behind Vivian's back. Vivian nodded, though Riley could see the nervousness in her eyes. "I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until 3 months ago. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation. FBI agents had investigated Vivian's claims about the brake tampering and found evidence that someone had indeed sabotaged her car. The mechanic who had done the work was arrested and, in exchange for a lighter sentence, revealed he'd been paid by someone connected to Meridian's current leadership. The documents Vivian had found in her father's papers proved even more damaging than anyone had expected. Internal emails showed company executives joking about side effects while publicly claiming their drugs were safe. Test results had been altered and safety reports had been buried or destroyed. Ms. Blackwood, the prosecutor, Attorney Davidson, approached them. "The defense is going to try to discredit your testimony by claiming your brain injury affected your memory. Are you prepared for that?" "Dr. Chen has run every test imaginable," Vivian replied. "My cognitive function is completely normal, better than normal, according to some of the assessments." Riley had witnessed this firsthand. During her recovery, Vivian had demonstrated an almost photographic recall of the documents she'd found. It was as if her time in the coma had somehow preserved and organized her memories with perfect clarity. The courtroom was packed as Vivian was wheeled to the witness stand. Family members of Nexatrol victims filled the gallery, some holding photos of loved ones they'd lost to the dangerous drug. The defense table was crowded with expensive lawyers representing Meridian Pharmaceuticals, their faces showing the confidence that money could buy. "Please state your name for the record," Attorney Davidson began. "Vivian Blackwood. Ms. Blackwood, can you tell the court about your relationship to Meridian Pharmaceuticals?" Vivian's voice was clear and strong as she explained how her father had founded the company and sold it years before his death. She described finding the hidden documents in his personal effects and realizing the magnitude of what they revealed. "The first document I found was dated March 15, 1999, she testified. It was an internal memo from the head of clinical trials to the CEO. The subject line read, "Nexatrol safety concerns. Urgent review required." She recited the memo word for word, describing how early test results had shown significant liver damage in 20% of patients taking Nexatrol. Instead of halting trials, the company had simply removed those patients from the study and continued. The defense attorney, Mr. Harrison, stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is claiming to remember exact details from documents she read months before a severe brain injury. This testimony is unreliable." Judge Peterson looked at Vivian thoughtfully. "Ms. Blackwood, you were in a coma for 3 months following your accident. How can the court be certain your memory of these documents is accurate?" Riley held her breath. This was the moment they'd all been preparing for. "Your Honor," Vivian said calmly, "I have copies of every document I'm testifying about, but more importantly, during my coma, these memories became incredibly clear to me. It's difficult to explain, but it was as if my unconscious mind spent 3 months organizing and preserving every detail I'd seen in those papers." She gestured to a box of documents on the prosecutor's table. "Everything I'm telling you can be verified against the original papers found in my father's safe." The prosecution spent the next 3 hours walking Vivian through document after document. Each time her testimony matched the written evidence perfectly. She recalled dates, names, dollar amounts, and medical terminology with startling precision. The most damaging testimony came when she described a document, dated just 2 months before Nexatrol's FDA approval. "The company's own scientists recommended against approval," Vivian testified. Dr. Patricia Wells, their head of safety, wrote a 20-page report detailing why Nexatrol was too dangerous for public use. That report was buried, and Dr. Wells was fired 3 days later. Riley watched the jury's faces as Vivian continued. She could see their shock and growing anger as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. During cross-examination, the defense tried every tactic to discredit her testimony. "Ms. Blackwood," Mr. Harrison said, pacing in front of the witness stand, "isn't it true that you suffered severe brain trauma that could affect your memory?" "My brain injury affected my consciousness, not my memory," Vivian replied steadily. "But you claim to remember exact wording from documents you read before your accident. That level of detail seems impossible." Vivian looked directly at the jury. Sometimes traumatic experiences can sharpen certain memories. I spent 3 months unconscious, but my mind was still working. Those documents and what they represented became burned into my memory because I knew how important they were. The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. Attorney Davidson stood before the jury holding photos of Nexatrol victims. Thomas Martinez, age 47, died of liver failure after taking Nexatrol for 6 months. Janet Cooper, age 32, needed a liver transplant at age 35. Robert Kim, age 51, died waiting for a transplant that never came. He placed the photos on an easel facing the jury. Meridian Pharmaceuticals knew their drug was killing people. They had the evidence in their hands and they chose profit over human lives. Ms. Blackwood risked her life to bring you this evidence. Someone tried to kill her to keep these documents secret. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Peterson asked. We have, Your Honor. On all charges of fraud, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment, we find Meridian Pharmaceuticals guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers and tears. Family members of victims embraced each other, finally seeing justice after years of legal battles. The pharmaceutical executives sat in stunned silence as the judge announced they would face both criminal charges and a settlement that would total over $400 million. Riley found Vivian outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters but looking directly at her. We did it, Vivian said simply. You did it, Riley corrected. You're the one who had the courage to come forward. Only because you saved my life. If you hadn't performed that surgery, if that pain hadn't pulled me back to consciousness, those documents might have stayed hidden forever. 6 months later, Riley received an unexpected phone call at the hospital. Dr. Martinez, this is Jennifer Wells from the Blackwood Foundation. Ms. Blackwood would like to meet with you. The Blackwood Foundation had been established with Vivian's portion of the legal settlement. Its mission was to support medical research and provide legal aid to families fighting pharmaceutical companies. Riley found Vivian in a modern office building downtown, walking without assistance and looking healthier than she had since awakening from her coma. I have a proposition for you, Vivian said after they'd caught up on the month since the trial. The foundation needs a medical director, someone who understands both the science and the human cost of medical negligence. Riley was surprised. I'm just a resident. I don't have experience running a foundation. You have something more important than experience. You have the instinct to do what's right regardless of the consequences. Vivian smiled. Besides, I happen to know a thing or two about taking on challenges that seem impossible. Riley looked out the office window at the city below. In the distance, she could see Metro General Hospital, where her journey with Vivian had begun with a routine surgery that changed both their lives. When do I start? She asked. As Riley drove home that evening, she reflected on how a single moment in an operating room had led to justice for hundreds of families and a new purpose for her own life. Sometimes the most ordinary actions, doing your job with care and compassion, could have extraordinary consequences. The woman who had awakened during surgery had awakened something in Riley too. The understanding that being a doctor meant more than just healing individual patients. Sometimes it meant fighting for the health and safety of everyone. 3 years later, the Blackwood Foundation had helped expose safety issues with 12 different medications and had provided legal support to over 300 families. Riley often thought about that morning when she'd received a simple text about a VIP patient, never imagining it would lead to the most important work of her life. And sometimes, late at night in her office, she would remember Vivian's eyes opening in that operating room and realize that some awakenings change everything.